Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. I'm so excited. I've been wanting to get Adam Clark on my podcast for some time now. I first heard you, Adam, being interviewed by Trip Fuller on Homebrewed Christianity's podcast. Mm-hmm. And then I had the privilege of meeting you back in July of this year, July of 2024, out in Wyoming at the relational theology deal. Remember, we had dinner one night together.
I do. I didn't know that was. I didn't know that was the first time we met, though. But okay,
that was the first time. I think. Well, were you at Theology Beer Camp in Springfield, Missouri? And
that's right. Yeah, that's right. That was the first time.
I did meet you there, and then at the Open and Relational Deal in Wyoming, and then again in Denver at Theology Beer Camp in Denver just this past October.
Mm-hmm.
So I've loved all the stuff that I've learned from you, and I'm continuing to learn from you. Adam Clark is Associate Professor of Theology at Xavier University. And he teaches courses in Black theology, Jesus and power, faith and justice, religion and hip hop, justice and contemplation, and likes to talk about the mystical prophetic. How's all that?
That's like good. That's good. That's good. Yeah. That's how. Yeah.
He did his PhD at Union Theological Seminary and studied with James Cone, who is one of the premier Black theologians in America. He passed away just 2018, is that right? Something like that.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
And one of the book that introduced me to James Cone was The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Mm-hmm. So then I had to read backwards a little bit after that, right? But yeah. So Adam, thanks for being on Spirituality Adventures.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. First, give people just a short, maybe 5-minute intro to Adam, where you grew up, kind of maybe your family background, your religious background. Just give us a little bit of a feel for your growing up years and what took you into theology as a profession. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Syracuse, New York, which is upstate New York. And I actually grew up in an Episcopal church. It was an integrated Episcopal church that gave me a sense of moral formation, but wasn't very spirited. And I had spiritual questions that I had all throughout. So there's a, when I was growing up, a lot of the questions that I was asking were not being answered by the church. So at the time, there was the kind of emergence of what was happening in terms of evangelical talk radio and TBN and that type of stuff. And I thought they had a lot more answers to questions than my kind of traditional denominational church. So I started to kind of explore there, then found that was kind of a straitjacket for me. So it wasn't in terms of going to college, I started to become close to a Black Baptist pastor who actually became my mentor. And he introduced me through Bible study to the Cotton Patch Bible and Howard Thurman and things like that. And I was like, wow, this is a completely new way of understanding biblical faith through the lens of justice. And I just never, it was never introduced to me that the Bible could actually be practical. It was always seen as spirituality as something that was either otherworldly or something that happened after death, and that what Christian life was about the don'ts. Don't drink, don't curse, don't have sex before marriage, right? It was never about affirming anything. It was also about denial. So it was this restrictive denial. And I was always kind of confused by that, right? Like, what are we supposed to do? I know what we're not supposed to do, but it was never anything affirmative. It wasn't an affirmative vision about how to embrace, how to actually live life with joy and passion and that type of thing. So when I started to really see these other ways of doing it, it gave the kind of scriptural mission, the scriptural tradition, like a purpose, a purpose and a meaning and a relevance in our contemporary world instead of something that was delayed to the afterlife. And in that sense, like I had always, I majored in philosophy, but I had a bent toward theology because it seemed to provide or speak to the issue of meaning and significance.
Mm.
And this is one of the reasons why I pursued that, because of the intellectual formation in college that led to me going to graduate school and then eventually pursue a PhD.
Okay, excellent.
Mhm.
And so you did your undergraduate at, I think, Colgate, is that right?
That's correct. Yes. Mhm.
And then you go from there right to Union.
Well, I went to Colgate Rochester Divinity, which is in Rochester, New York. So I stayed some time in Rochester, which is outside Buffalo, about an hour something, about 2 hours from Syracuse. And then went from Colgate Rochester Divinity School to Union, which is in New York City, in Harlem specifically. And, that's where I first encountered James Cone. And James Cone was my mentor there. And, you know, the rest of my formation came under James Cone.
Yeah. Help, help for those who are listening might even know James Cone. Help situate James Cone a little bit for maybe I mean there'll be a mixture of people listening. I've got evangelical people, progressive people, a lot of,
Okay,
but
sure.
maybe help situate it for, especially for maybe the white evangelical person who doesn't, who's never
Sure,
heard
sure.
of Cone, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Well, James Cone is known as the father of Black theology, Black liberation theology. So, what is that? Liberation theology is a theological movement that occurred in the 1960s. It was part of a global movement where um, King asked the question. Well, let me back up a little bit. Part of the offshoots or part of the sources of Black theology came from the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. So what's happening in the Black Power with the civil rights movement, you have King, who's actually um, taking the gospel and reinterpreting the gospel in light of the tradition of African Americans at the time. At the time, you had Billy Graham, who was the number one pastor in the United States, right? Maybe even globally, right? So
Yes.
what Billy Graham is going around doing crusades in the segregated South, talking about come to Christ, give your soul to Christ, right? And be saved, right?
Get your
And that
heaven, be saved, go to heaven.
exactly, right? So that's what was interpreted as Christian identity.
Yeah.
It,
And
it
I grew
was
up
to,
Baptist and got saved at a Southern Baptist youth camp. And that's why I ended up at Baylor and
there
Southwest.
you go, there
So
you go,
you're
right?
talking my language now, brother.
Right. Well, that's why I wanted to think. When you told me to give it to
Yeah.
white evangelicals, this is what you should understand. So King is actually going out getting arrested, right? And people are like, "How can you be a Christian minister and get arrested?" Right? That make no sense in light of what Billy Graham, who's the dominant definition of Christianity at the time,
Yep.
right? So what King is doing is offering a counter interpretation to Christianity than Billy Graham's idea of Christianity. That Christianity wasn't about the soul, the individual soul's relationship to God. Christianity is about the whole person, mind, body, and soul. So, what happens when Christianity is meeting Black bodies, right? In terms of
Mm.
that,
Yeah.
right? So, what happens is that King talks about that is not sufficient to give your soul to God when your body is hungry and your mind is empty. That God is concerned about the whole person, not just the soul alone.
Mm.
So he says the gospel has to speak to all aspects of the person, not the soul exclusively.
Mm.
So that for him, salvation wasn't just about the afterlife, it was this life. That's why he had the idea of beloved community. Beloved community was his approximation of what the kingdom of God looks like on earth. It
Mm.
wasn't just the kingdom of heaven in the afterlife. It was what the kingdom of God might look like on earth. So the civil rights movement, from King's perspective, was about trying to bring the kingdom or approximate the kingdom of God in political discourse. That means a democracy that was going to be inclusive of all people. So when you have the civil rights movement, people look at it as just the advancement of Black people. Well, for King, that was too narrow. It wasn't just about the advancement of Black people, it was about how America could actually approximate beloved community in this moment, right? So with that, you have with the kind of civil rights movement there, you have the feminist movement that comes after that. It wasn't until the 1970s that you had women priests who came into the Episcopal fold. And then you have the ecological movement. Then you have the labor movement. You have all these type of marginalized groups who are claiming space within the American context based on King's faith-based movement in the civil rights tradition, right? So they're actually trying to make America a more inclusive democracy, or to make America to be as good as her promise, right? In terms of, if, and the fundamental belief there is that if we're spiritual equality, which evangelicals agree with, should lead to social equality. You can't talk about equal souls if we're not social equals, right? And the South was a stark contradiction to that message. So, on one point, King is offering a redefinition of Christianity. So, the question becomes, what does it mean to be Christian? Is it Billy Graham or is it King? The second question of Black theology is, what does it mean to be Black? And that was even a starker question, a more dangerous question, because you have Malcolm X coming on here.
Mm-hmm.
And Malcolm said to Black people that you are not Negro. See, King always used the term of Negroes, because even in this "I Have a Dream" speech, he would talk about Negro boys and white boys, right? He didn't use the term Black. With Malcolm, you have the idea of we are Black, and Black wasn't just a semantic thing; it was a whole different paradigm of how you understand Black humanity, right? It was, Negro was understood as a deferential posture to whiteness. Blackness was understood as self-affirmation and self-determination, meaning that we're claiming our history, we're claiming our culture, right? We're claiming our historical African origins, where Negroness was some type of just assimilationist idea into the larger American project. So what happens with Malcolm, Malcolm not just defines Black, he goes back and says that, look, Christianity is a white man's religion. Why? Because Black people have been Christian for hundreds of years in this country, but were enslaved by Christians, and they're still not free. The problem becomes is, why do you worship the same God as your former slaveholders,
Yeah.
right? You're worshiping the
Yeah.
slaveholder God. And
That's
he's,
Isn't that the miracle of the Black church and the Black theology movement?
well,
That
there's the thing, right? Right. That's the thing. And Malcolm, but Malcolm problematized that, right?
yeah.
He said that,
Yeah.
no, you have the wrong God. And he's not just looking at the United States, he's looking around the world. He's going to Nigeria. He's looking at Asia. He's looking at every time you see white Christians, you see their foot on the necks of the indigenous people around the world. So, how can you actually claim this tradition that is not giving any type of equality to people who look like you,
Yeah, he's
right?
seen white colonization, European colonization around the world, and seeing that whole issue, right?
Certainly. And he's
And
calling
respond.
out
Yeah.
all the contradictions. He says Christianity claims to be a universal religion. Christianity claims to be a religion that doesn't promote color. But every place you go, you see Christians, you see white Christians on top and other people on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at someone like Mahatma Gandhi never became Christian,
Right.
always was a Hindu,
Mm-hmm.
right? He didn't struggle within the context of Christian identity. It was Hindu. So he started to reinterpret Hindu in light of his own tradition. Why don't we go back, we being Black folks, go back to our own traditions? And for him, his own traditions, he reinterpreted as Islam. So there, at that point, many Black people broke from Christianity and went to Islam. So the question that James Cone puts together is, what does it mean to be Black and what does it mean to be Christian? Because for him, he redefined that if Christianity is a white man's religion, how could it affirm Black people? And if Christianity is not about liberation and is about pacification or domestication, right? Because Malcolm at the same time is critiquing the civil rights movement and saying that the civil rights movement is domesticating Black people. How can you let dogs be sicked on women and children and not fight back? How can you have fire hoses? You're not a man if you could do that. He says, in Islam, you are taught by Allah to fight back against your oppressors, right? So he's looking at the strategy and saying that how how why is it that Dr. King has to be nonviolent, but George Washington does not have to be nonviolent with his Christianity, right? That the only people that are mandatory nonviolence in Christianity is the Black community. White people don't have, George Bush didn't have to be, no one said George Bush had to be nonviolent or Donald Trump has to be nonviolent. The evangelical community doesn't put that strictures. It's only Black people that are taught they have to be nonviolent. And Malcolm said that is a pacification and domestication technique. And he
Mm-hmm.
says that in order to be free, by any means necessary, meaning that we are nonviolent with people who are nonviolent with us. But if you sit there and we say we want a hamburger at the local burger joint, or we want to drink water at a water fountain and you hose us, then we have the right to defend ourselves. That's what being a human being is about,
Yeah.
right? So what's happening, he's listening, that Black pastors are listening to this and saying that, wow, Malcolm, you might have a point. Like, why are we doing this? So Black theology came together to try to take the legacy of King and the legacy of Malcolm and to reinterpret that in light of the Christian gospel, right?
Yeah, thank you. Can I let me hit a pause there just a minute? If somebody were to just read one biography on Malcolm, let's say a white evangelical, I'm still trying to help
Sure.
people understand. Because, anyway, I think understanding the gospel of Jesus through Black theology is the way to understand the gospel.
Right. Well,
I'm on a bandwagon with you about trying to introduce these concepts to a broader to white evangelicals, even in America, right? So what one book of Cone's, if somebody's going to read one biography on Malcolm and maybe one book of Cone's, what would you recommend? And then I was going to make one side comment. I have a friend who works for the NFL Football League, but he grew up Black in New Orleans, discriminated, drinking out of white or Black drinking fountains, all that kind of stuff. But there's a movie that came out called Deacons of Defense.
yes, there you go.
Have you seen that?
I haven't seen the movie, but I know the Deacons of Defense. Yeah, I've read books. Yeah.
What's the actor that that played Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah, yeah,
Plays
yeah,
in
yeah.
is in the movie Deacons of Defense. My friend, his dad started the Deacons of Defense.
Oh,
He,
really? Okay.
he
Yeah,
lives about
yeah,
5 minutes
yeah,
from where I'm at right here in Kansas City. Dear friend,
yeah.
his dad was.
Okay.
So he started coming to my church several years ago, back my previous church, and he said, "Hey, Fred," he gave me a copy of that DVD. He says, "I want you to watch this. This is
Mm,
tell you a little bit about."
yeah,
It. And I was like,
yeah,
"Oh my
right,
gosh, yeah." So anyway,
right, yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
Malcolm and Cone, like one biography on Malcolm for
Okay,
somebody.
well, the most important thing on Malcolm would be Alex Haley's the autobiography of Malcolm X, as told
Oh,
to Alex Haley. That would be the most important one,
okay.
right? For Malcolm. For Cone, if you're a casual person, the most accessible one is For My People because it gives you the whole kind of layout of Black theology. It's written in the early 1970s. It's a bit dated, but it's written for people probably at the high school level. It's really accessible and it gives you just a layout of just different moments within Black theology. But I'd also would say for evangelicals is probably the best way to understand Black and all liberation theology is to read Exodus, right? Because the paradigm of that is the Exodus story,
Yeah.
right? When the Hebrews were called to be free from Pharaoh, right? It wasn't just about changing your soul, right? It was a material liberation, right? And that's where all liberation theology movement they reread Exodus. That Exodus isn't a historical event. Exodus is an ongoing event.
Yeah.
That we are the people of Exodus, and Exodus is probably the most important passage in Black Christian history, right? Because you have an enslaved people who lead a slave rebellion against a tyrannical dictator.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So Black people read that with a sign of hope, right? To say if God did that for the Hebrew people, God could do that for our people in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about Pharaonic Empire, we're talking about American Empire,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a rereading of the biblical narrative in the Let My People Go tradition
Mm-hmm.
within the United States. And that's what keeps Black people Christian. And that's what Black theology is about. It's
Yeah.
like how God moves within the Exodus paradigm.
Mm. Man, one of my Black pastor friends here in Kansas City um, made a comment to that. He says, what if the Jewish people had to stay in Egypt,
Hmm.
story, instead of leaving Egypt?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm not
But,
sure. Well,
think about the difference between leaving Egypt and moving
right,
to a new promised land,
right. So they're promising,
having to
yeah,
stay in Egypt and try to live this freedom out among
yeah.
masters.
Well, what does it mean to sing a new song in a strange land? I mean, part
Yeah.
of these are just metaphorical ideas
Yeah.
about that. I mean, even like two things. One thing that people may know, well, may should remember is that when Barack Obama wrote his biography about his years in office, he titled it um, "The Promised Land," right? In terms of that, right? So he's like playing on that metaphor too,
Mm-hmm.
right? In terms
Mm-hmm.
of that. So
Yeah.
that's just really talking about um, just how important that imagery has been in the context of American history, or Black American history, I should say. Uh, so and also I should say Jesus. Jesus becomes a second the Lukean Jesus, the Jesus of Luke 4 19, where Jesus comes to the synagogue, right, and opens the scroll of Isaiah, and it connects his anointing to what setting the captives free, right, giving sight to the blind, and letting the oppressed go free, right, and that type of
Jubilee.
thing.
Jubilee.
Right. And declaring the year of Jubilee, right?
Yeah.
So a Jubilee is a way of trying to talk about freedom, right? Of debt, freedom of enslavement, right? All of this becomes like very important in the context of the African American tradition. So that becomes the mission of Jesus. So the Spirit is connected to these practical works, and that's the mission of Jesus. So both the Exodus narrative and also the authoritative meaning of Jesus in Luke become combined to understand how Black people are rereading this Christian tradition in light of the spirit of liberation that was happening at the time.
Mm, 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 mm. Yeah, it's so, because you grow up white evangelical and Southern Baptist tradition. And, I was well read and well studied, but I still, I was an evangelist, Adam. I've, I've led lots of people in sinners' prayers and led people to Jesus. And at the same time, I still tried to have a strong social justice platform, with the Hole in the Gospel book that came out. I don't know if you remember that one. It was an attempt by an evangelical who used to lead, oh gosh, what's the big organization? It was Richard Stearns, who led the one of the huge nonprofits that feeds people around the world. I'm blanking on it. Anyway,
was it World Vision or World
yeah,
Church?
World Vision. The CEO
of
World Vision wrote a book called "The Hole in Our Gospel," and he was attempting to point out that white evangelicalism has missed the point. There's a hole in their gospel, is really, and then he's trying to direct them into this work of justice. And so help us, folks that have grown up white evangelical, privileged in the American empire, who thinks that America, they don't see the world through your eyes, right?
Yeah,
that's the big challenge. How do we help people see the world through the eyes of the marginalized, the oppressed, which is the eyes that Jesus would have seen the world through?
Absolutely. Right? Yeah,
that's the thing. And how can you help us re-understand the whole flow of the gospel message, which is justice? And if you reread Jesus through these eyes, even if you read the Hebrew prophets through these eyes, like with Abraham Joshua Heschel, when I was working on my PhD in the Hebrew Bible, Heschel became one of my favorite guys. Helped guide me through some of this stuff, and I began to reread everything through the eyes of the oppressed, the marginalized, and it completely reshaped my vision of the gospel.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, that's what the liberation's message is about, right? It's about saying that, reading the gospel from below, right? Through that, it is, it's difficult when you read the gospel with dominant eyes, because the gospel is a revolutionary document and it's right in front of you, and many of you miss it.
Right.
Okay.
We do.
Right.
I missed it for a long time.
Right. And the way you are able to see it is because you're in solidarity with the marginalized right now, and you're able to see breaks in it. Right. Because, for example, here's one thing, just to give you a sense of how it's right in front of your eyes. We're coming up on Christmas season right now. In Luke, there's Mary's sermon. We call it the Magnificat, right? People have seen it a lot of times, but what they don't emphasize is that within the Magnificat, right? Mary says the rulers will be brought down from their thrones. The hungry will be filled, and the rich will walk away empty-handed. Right? Like, that's right there. The fact that you miss it every Christmas, right? That's on you, right? And you talk about your literal translation of the Bible. I believe in the whole Bible, at the word of God and that type of thing. And that's right in front of you, that the rulers will be brought down and the hungry will be filled and the rich will be. That's in Luke 1, right? Like, that's right there. And you don't see it.
Yeah.
That shows how blind you are into the way you've read the Bible.
Yeah.
Because the Bible, it's right there. And even in the Bible, the idea of going to heaven, in Revelations, it's like, no, the heaven goes down to earth we go up to heaven, right? Like you miss the direction of the Bible,
Yes.
right? That's dominant eye reading.
Yeah.
And what the liberationist tradition is that in order to be in solidarity with the poor, or even Cohen used to talk about becoming black metaphorically, right? Right. He talked about how whites become black when they actually identify that way, is that they see the gospel through new eyes.
Yeah.
So most of the interpretations of liberation theology is seeing the gospel through new eyes and
Yeah.
reading against the lens of the marginalized.
And I can just tell you, Adam, I grew up in a high school just not too far from where I'm sitting right now. There were just a few black families in that high school, right?
Mm.
And we all did sports together. We were friends. I never once thought about how their experience might be different than mine. We were just friends. We played sports together. And if I saw them today, we'd hug each other and everything's fine. You know what I mean? But it wasn't until years later where I started reflecting backwards on how different my experience would have been at a dominantly white high school in the 70s than my black friends' experience would have been.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it because until you hang out and start hearing stories about how my black pastor friends have all been abused by this, and, you just don't see it when you grow up in that. Why I'm echoing what you're saying. There's a blindness based on the way we're raised that cuts us off from many people who have different experiences growing up in the same spot.
Yeah.
The color of skin, or whatever, or and any number of things. Marginalization can happen a number of different ways. Like the LGBTQ plus community would be a great example too, right?
Sure. Yeah, we're all blind to be human. That's why that's why diversity is not just some PC issue. It's actually a human issue.
Exactly.
Because we all have blind spots and we need to be in conversation with each other. There's no corner of the humanity that has a monopoly on the truth. All of us need each other where we can see the world clearly.
Yes. So, oh my gosh, I could talk to you for hours. So, so give us in your class on Black theology. You've kind of given us the backdrop with Martin Luther, with Malcolm, and then with Cone. Where do you see it going right now in terms of influencing the broader Christian culture to have new eyes? Because I'm assuming at Xavier University, what's the students that come into your class? Are they PhD students or are you teaching undergrads?
Oh, no, they're undergrads. They're 18 to 21 years.
So I'm assuming you're introducing a lot of people to this for the first
time. Oh, certainly. Oh, yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you love to see when you see the light bulb go on in a white kid's eye, let's say, in your class on Black theology? What are some of those moments where you're going, oh man, this makes it worth it to be teaching this and trying to get this new perspective out there about what Jesus and the gospel is all about?
Yeah. And most Black kids don't know this either. So
Right.
They're not taught. It's not like the Black church is doing an exceptional job at introducing themselves to their own tradition, because most Black pastors, I'll say it this way. I heard Jesse Jackson say this. He says, a lot of times Black pastors, they'll have a picture of Martin Luther King for respectability. They have another picture of Malcolm X for toughness, but then they have a Billy Graham theology pulling down for the pulpit. So many Black pastors just reproduce the theology that they see as popular or they grew up on, right? So many times they don't, there are people, even though you have a Black church, it doesn't necessarily have a Black theology, right? They are using literature that are created by white evangelicals, that are using imagery that is created by white evangelicals and just reproducing it within the Black context. So many students, when they hear about this, they are like, wow, even to call the Exodus story an African story, as if that people forget that the Exodus happened in Africa.
Right.
Right. That shows how colonized the imagination is, right? Because
Right.
people imagine just white people, I don't know, into that populate
It's
when
like
when
it's like
when
Charlton
people
Heston in the Ten Commandments. That's
right,
all a
right,
bunch of white
yeah.
people going.
Right, exactly. When people imagine, well, this is part of the issue, even when we talk about Palestine, Hebrew, Israel today, right? When
Yeah.
people imagine, like, there's a difference between biblical Israel and
Yes.
contemporary Israel, right? And so when people imagine like what Moses looked like, they think about an Ashkenazi Jew. They don't think about it as if an African, right? In terms of that, even though he was raised by Pharaoh and all these other types of things. So the point being is that part of it is decolonizing the imagination because the default pattern of looking at biblical characters is white,
Mm-hmm.
right? So so I say that to say that it's all students. It's not just white students. It's all students. But white students, white students. Well, first of all, the class is an elective class. So if a white student even takes a course that's titled Black Theology, it shows they have some type of commitment to understanding, right? I
Mm-hmm.
have general classes where I teach Black theology, but it's just a section within a lot of different types of theologies.
Okay.
But if they take a Black theology course, they usually have some encounter with the race that they're wrestling with.
Mm.
Either they grew up in communities where or they just totally don't understand it and they're wrestling with it and they want some type of clarity, right? In terms of that what happened with Black folks. So a lot of them who take the class are really they're very pleased because they don't have a way to kind of explain their own social existence and what racial division looks like in the history of it.
Mm.
Right. And what I usually do, which usually shocks both Black and white students, is I take them historically. Here's what I usually say. I say, what year did Black people come to this country? Most of them don't know. And I gave a conservative estimate of 1619. And then I say, okay, so when's the country's birthday? When did the country actually start? They 1776, right? So I say, first, I want you to observe is that Black people were in this country before it was born, right? That's one thing. So a lot of times when I was young, some white kids used to try to bully me and tell me you go back to Africa. And I'm like, I wish I would have known that Black people were in the country longer than most European immigrants. So that's one. Two is that Black people, when did slavery end? And it ended after the Civil War, which is 1880, 86, 18, excuse me, yeah, 1865, right? So what happens is that Black people were enslaved for 246 years in this country. And then after that, it was not from slavery to freedom, it's slavery to Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like 1964, 65,
Right. Right.
right?
It's
So
400 years.
right. So what I
Yep.
remind people is that even though the mythology of America, that America started as a democracy, if you take it from the Black experience, Black people have been enslaved in the country longer than they've been free.
Right.
And that's just a starting point,
Yeah.
right? So I
Well,
so
the other thing, like my friend who I told you about, grew up in New Orleans, who dad was Deacons of Fence, I mean, people don't like he's basically my age. I'm 63. He's
mhm,
just a few years older than me.
okay.
I I have so many white people in America that are like, oh, we've had a black president. There's no problem anymore, right? There's
Mhm.
no discernment of 400 years of this history that you're talking about, and then how that can still be systemically integrated into systems of injustice that we don't even see. We just grew up with them and don't even see them, right? Us, especially,
Yeah.
I'm talking white people right now in particular.
Yeah, yeah. And what I try to introduce those folks to, there's something called colorblind racism. Colorblind racism. And what that means is that you could have race neutral languages, but racially stratified impacts,
Mm,
right? So that what's happening in the law right now is that when Black people talk about people are racist, they don't mean that the that every white person has personal animus toward black people, all black people. What they mean is that there's a certain systematic and structural way that if you look at any misery index, whether it be health outcomes, whether it be educational outcomes, black is always on the bottom and white is on top, right? So why is that? There's a whole, if you look at residential living or income disparities and that type of thing, there's always a racial character. Now, if you had a totally non-racist country, you would expect that it wouldn't follow the lines of race so systematically. Like there would be equal distributions of misery, right? There might be misery, but it'll be racially distributed equally, right?
Mhm.
It's but always the good is distributed top up
Yeah.
racially, and the bad is always concentrated in the black
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah.
So that's what we mean when we talk about being a racist country. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that every single white person has some type of personal animus toward black people.
Right. Right.
It's about how misery is concentrated and how goods are circulated in the country follows a racial line.
Yeah. 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 Thank you. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Well, I I don't want to. I want to have a little bit of time to talk about the your religion and hip hop class,
Okay.
but um, but I also want to have a little bit. We're I'm watching our time here, Adam. So
Okay.
I want to have a little bit of time to talk about your religion hip hop course, and a little bit of time to talk about your vision for justice and contemplation and the mystical prophetic.
Okay.
Okay, so
Sure.
maybe we have maybe we can give 5-7 minutes to each of those. Sorry.
Okay. All right. No
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. Anyway, yeah, let's start with the religion and hip hop. That really caught my attention when I was looking at all the different courses you've taught through the years.
Yeah, that came when there was like a burgeoning hip hop literature, and it was kind of like religion, hip hop meets the academy. And what I look for was so much, well, there's a couple ways to understand religion and hip hop. One, you can look at um, the way the church has used hip hop. Um, Part of it was like looking at how let me say it this way. There are different stages on how the Christian church encountered hip hop. First, it was rejectionist. It was like word and world, right? It was like we of the church are about the word and we should not engage the world, right? In terms of that. So it was seen some type of worldly music, just like heavy metal was seen as some type of worldly music. So it was rejected by the church. And then you had people, artists in the church who would kind of Christianize the lyrics. So you had like hip hop, kind of like holy hip hop or Christian hip hop. And you would have the same thing in the the heavy metal situation, right? You'd have kind of heavy metal, Christian heavy metal and that kind of thing. So you had that. But then people say, oh, that's kind of corny.
You
It's
have
like, you know,
Striper and you have Lecrae, right? Or
right. Yeah. 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 I mean, this is way before. I'm talking about the 80s and 90s, like
okay,
the
okay.
emergence of that. Like,
Striper, Striper's 80s.
yeah, yeah. You would have this type of you would have that type of thing. Um, so first you had a rejectionist phase, which lasted for a long time. Then you'd have like a certain type of like Christianization of the music. Um, and what I really talked about in class is when people started to look at the prophetic dimensions of hip hop culture, meaning that how does it hip hop comes out of like a certain form of black suffering, and how are these voices are talking about suffering and urban life and that type of thing. What's the diagnosis that's happening there? And that's why I mean the prophetic edge.
Mm.
So looking at what's being prophetic within these hip hop discourse. And I use certain types of representative figures, especially like Tupac and that kind of thing,
Mm.
to look at how he's like kind of talking about suffering, and then looking at lamentations in the Bible,
Mm.
right? And then looking at like how Black theologians talk about Black suffering within certain types of folk literature. So I'm looking at the category or the theme of suffering that runs, or in Psalms and that type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're looking at like kind of like these hip hop lyrics, like they're kind of like modern day Psalms or modern day Lamentations and what's happening. Listening to for the cry of the oppressed
Mm.
within these lyrics. So that's how I started to like look at like what's the diagnosis of that type of thing, and then talking about what are the redemptive possibilities now that you diagnose that type of
Wow.
thing. So
That's
that was kind of my approach in terms of like
it.
looking at hip hop discourse.
Love that. The rose,
Mhm.
the concrete.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it was like looking at a certain type of selective people and looking at broader themes within certain genres. And hip hop is multi-genre, just like any type of. So
Mm-hmm.
there are certain types of toxic genres of hip hop, and there are certain types of maybe redemptive genres of hip hop as well. So just looking at hip hop is such a multivariant thing. It's like, okay, we're looking at a certain tradition of hip hop and certain types of aspects of it. So we try to have a more complex and sophisticated realm and use religion as a way to kind of interrogate and look at it so thematically. So it wasn't about trying to religionize hip hop or even looking at the images of God or images of sacredness. Like what are they considering sacred within that? Right. So it's more about religion was seen as a kind of way to ask certain types of existential questions. It wasn't about trying to religionize hip hop. It was a way of trying to talk about the creation of meaning and value within the hip hop tradition.
Cool.
Mhm.
All right, and then give us a little take on your idea of mystical prophetic.
Oh yeah. Well, the liberationist tradition, as I mentioned before, has been really centered in the idea of the prophetic. As I said before, in Luke 4:14 to 19, right?
Mm-hmm.
He comes to Galilee. He unrolls the scroll with Isaiah and then announces how he's been anointed, right? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. To what? To proclaim good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, sight for the blind, the oppressed to go free, and the acceptable year of the Lord or the Jubilee, right? So that's been kind of standard with people like James Cone and even Gustavo Gutierrez, who just like passed about a couple weeks ago, who's like the father of Latin American theology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what both of these folks missed was that before Jesus goes into the synagogue, what does he do? He's in the wilderness for 40 days and is tempted by the devil. And this is the contemplative or the mystical piece,
Mm.
right? So I'm talking about how Jesus is actually really doing these contemplative practices in the desert, gets tempted by the devil, and is wrestling internally with himself,
Mm.
right? To me, this is the mystical piece that's missing. So before the prophetic piece that happens in Luke 4:14, he does the contemplative piece right before that. And
Mm.
what I'm saying, to get the full impact of the gospel, you have to combine both. You
Mm.
have to have that contemplative before you have that social justice aspect to it. Right. And I
Yeah.
think what happens is a lot of times we go right to the social justice and we don't understand the spirituality that Jesus has right before that. Even he says his anointing is connected to social justice. Right. We don't really talk about that's an anointing, though. It's not just him just being a social justice actor without a type of spiritual groundedness.
Yeah, that anointing is the Mashiach, the messianic anointing for
Exactly.
yeah. It flows
Exactly.
from the I like the way you said that. It flows from the contemplative, the mystical into the justice.
Right. We bypass that passage. And I'm
Mm.
like, no, we need to really look and tease that passage out because that's where Jesus does a lot of contemplative work right up there. And he's being tempted by the evil one,
Yeah.
right? And he overcomes that. We should not live by bread alone. right? He gets tempted physically. He gets tempted in many types of ways about his own lust and all that stuff like that. And I'm saying that should be a message to us who are in the social justice world, is that we have to have a certain type of practice of resistance.
That's so
Right.
cool. When I went through my big meltdown, I I really benefited from a type of therapy called DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and I had
Mm,
internal family systems. And the DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, is a cognitive behavioral therapy, but that has a mindfulness meditation component.
mhm,
And I got introduced to mindfulness meditation, and then the last 2 years I've done a training with Tara Brock and Jack Cornfield, which teach mindfulness
mm,
meditation they come more from the Vipassana Buddhist tradition.
mhm.
So I've been listening to Dharma talks now for 2 years out of this
Oh,
stream and practice
mhm.
mindful meditation. And then I've also been practicing like a Christian contemplative prayer model from the Richard Rohr model, and
Yeah,
have some groups that do that as well. And and I actually dove into that for my own mental health, honestly. but
absolutely.
but then it's begun to help shape I think my whole spirituality in a new and fresh way for me. And then this really deep understanding of the gospel, how you're shaping this idea of the gospel. It's really, coming from an evangelical background, I always thought the progressive Christians, they don't believe Jesus rose from the dead. They don't have any power. They don't, all that. And then all of a sudden, now I'm seeing it through these new eyes, and I'm going, dang, we had a hole in our gospel. We missed a whole lot.
Yeah,
In fact, I think we missed the heart of the gospel. Literally,
yeah,
missed
right, right, right.
it. We
And to add to let me just add one point to what you're saying, because I work at a Catholic school, and there's an Ignatian tradition. Like most of the mystical or contemplative practices, the Catholics carried over, not the Protestants, because they had traditions. So there's a guy named Ignatius of Loyola who has his whole spiritual exercises, and what he believed that in order to have physical exercises, right, that strengthen you in the body, you have to have a spiritual exercise as well. So he developed these whole spiritual exercises on the life of Jesus. I actually teach them to certain faculty at Xavier University. And he mapped out just this 30-day practice we actually do it a year, but it's split up. But the point being, it's about certain types of meditation. And a lot of it's about how to imagine yourself um, in the place of Jesus and to enter not just through the intellect, but through the imagination into the story of Jesus.
mm, I love that.
Hmm.
Love that. Yes. Yeah, I've been trying to go back and pick up on some of the Catholic mystics from, Julian of Norwich and Ignatius, obviously Francis, just trying to reconnect with that rich history of the contemplative in the Christian tradition. It's been interesting to look at it too, parallel with the Vipassana Buddhist tradition. There's so much overlap. It's so fascinating.
Oh, absolutely.
It's
But
so
here's the important difference. Here's an important difference, I would say, Fred. It's about desire. In Buddhism, there's the elimination and extinction of desire. Within the Ignatian tradition, desire, or in the Christian tradition, just in general, the desire for God, the desire for the kingdom is seen as a positive good. So it's about the training of desire, not the elimination
yeah,
of desire.
recognizing the difference between healthy and unhealthy, maybe desire is
Yeah,
yeah.
because what happens within the Buddhist tradition in general, it's about like desire in and of itself is to be extinguished. Um, and both have the idea of non-attachment, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of that.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Yeah.
Buddhist is deeper. The Christian has an affirmation that there are certain things to desire that are actually a positive good.
Love
So
God, love your
yeah,
neighbor, love yourself,
yeah,
love your
exactly,
enemies.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that, and the reason why I wanted to make that point is because most younger people, when they talk about meditation or contemplation, they go to Buddhism, which is fine. But I want to encourage people is that you have this in your own tradition too, right?
You don't have
Yeah,
tradition.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you could be enhanced, and it's not
Yeah.
like some type of competitive thing, but you shouldn't go to another tradition without understanding your own tradition first. and then have a dialogue.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, excellent. I love that.
And that's the only reason why I bring that up.
Yeah, yeah, that's good though. I like that. Yeah, as I've been going through both, I've been having that dialogue not only with myself and my whole history, but also with other people from both traditions. It's been really fun, actually, for me.
Mm-hmm.
Very fun. Well, Adam, I told you we'd get you done by 30, and so I want to honor that. But my goodness, I could just go for hours on this,
okay.
dig in deeply. But I hope we gave enough thoughts to people to scratch a little bit of interest, and my hope is that people will dive into some of these books that even we've mentioned. Like, you might just close. How can people connect with you, maybe on Instagram or Facebook? And then how could a person that just happened to listen to this and really got intrigued with it, what are a few practical ways they could connect with you or connect with reading and studying?
Yeah. Well, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I always can't remember my handle. Okay. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Adam CLK so it's a kind of an abbreviation of my last name, Adam Clark. You could actually, probably the best way to reach me, Clark Adam at xavier.edu. That's one way also to reach me. I'm on X. I can't remember my I'm not active on X. Probably Instagram is probably the best, and Facebook is probably the best. I'm most active on those. But yeah, I would love to, if anybody has any kind of further questions or inquiries or comments, I'd be interested in hearing it. I see this as just like theology is a ongoing conversation, right? It's just something that never ends. It's always being revised and updated. So any type of feedback or insights that people have, I'd welcome that. And you can reach me at those places. I'm supposed to be coming out with a podcast and a website series sometime in 2025. Not sure about the exact date that'll drop, but I have a whole bunch of things in the can, and that will be one way to actually contact me as well.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I've been encouraged by you, challenged by you, and really appreciate what your heart is, what you bring to the table. And so I'm a learner. So I feel like I'm a teenager all over again, just learning all new again, and
right.
I've been at it for a while. So, but thank you.
Right. We all are. Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. And appreciate you and your heart, your ministry, and what your voice in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm honored to be able to interview you. Seriously. So
appreciate it, Fred.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.